"Dad, you're going to have to sleep in the shed tonight." I thought I had misheard him. The rain was hitting the kitchen windows hard enough that the glass rattled in its frame, and my son-in-law, Daniel, was standing 3 feet away from me with his arms folded across his chest. "What did you say?" He didn't raise his voice. That somehow made it worse. "I said my parents are coming tomorrow morning. They need your room." I looked past him toward the hallway. "My room. Not the guest room. Not a couch. My room. The room at the back of the house where my late wife, Margaret, had slept beside me for 29 years. The room where her photographs were still on the dresser. The room where I had spent the last 6 months after burying her." I looked back at Daniel. "You want me to sleep in the shed?" He shrugged. "It's only temporary." "Daniel." "What?" "That shed doesn't have a bed. You can put a mattress in there. There's no heat. It's not winter. It's 48 degrees tonight." He sighed as though I were making an unreasonable argument. "Dad, please don't turn this into something it doesn't need to be." Something it didn't need to be. I stared at him for several seconds. Then I looked at my daughter, Emily. She was standing near the refrigerator. She wouldn't look at me. That was when I understood. Daniel hadn't made this decision alone. Emily had already agreed. And what hurt most wasn't the shed. It was the fact that my daughter was standing 10 feet away while her husband told me where I was allowed to sleep in the home I had paid for. Thank you for joining us here on Father's Hidden Reckoning. Your support truly means a lot to us. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today, drop your city or country in the comments below. Please note that this story contains fictional elements created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarities to real people, names, places, or events are purely coincidental. However, the message and lesson behind this story may be something that stays with you long after the story ends. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in a place you helped build, stay with me. Because I didn't argue that night. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten Daniel. I simply looked at my daughter, picked up my coffee, and said 4 words. "All right. I understand." Daniel smiled. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what I had just decided. My name is Thomas Bennett, and at 67 years old, I had spent most of my life believing that family meant you endured things other people wouldn't. I had been wrong. I learned that on a rainy Tuesday night in October. But to understand why I didn't simply pack a bag and leave, you need to understand what that house meant to me. It wasn't just a house. It was the last thing Margaret and I built together. We bought it in 1997, when Emily was 8 years old. Back then, the place looked nothing like it did later. The kitchen had yellow cabinets that smelled faintly of old cooking oil. The roof leaked above the dining room. The backyard was mostly weeds. And the detached shed behind the garage was barely standing. Margaret loved it anyway. She stood in the empty living room on the day we moved in, turned slowly in a circle, and said, "Thomas, I can see us growing old here." I laughed. "We're 38. Exactly. You're planning our old age already?" She smiled. "I plan everything." She did. Margaret could tell you where every screwdriver was, when every bill was due, and exactly how much cinnamon belonged in her apple pie. She also had a habit of leaving little notes around the house. Not important notes. Things like, "Buy milk. Don't forget Emily's dentist appointment. Your lunch is in the blue container." Once, when I had been working late for several weeks, I found a note inside my briefcase. It said, "Come home before the house forgets what you look like." I kept that note for 23 years. Margaret died in March. Cancer. 18 months of hospitals, medications, scans, hopeful mornings and terrible afternoons. By the end, she weighed less than 90 pounds. But she still complained about the hospital coffee. "You'd think," she whispered one morning, "with all the money they charge, they could figure out coffee." I laughed so hard I had to leave the room. That was Margaret. Even when death was standing outside the door, she could still find something to complain about. 3 days before she died, she asked me to sit beside her. Emily was there. Daniel was there too. Margaret looked at all three of us. Then she looked at me. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let this house become a museum." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." She glanced toward the bedroom window. "I don't want you sitting in that room every day staring at my things." "I won't." "You will." I smiled. "You're very confident. I've been married to you for 39 years. I know you." Emily laughed quietly. Margaret reached for her hand. Then she looked at Daniel. "Take care of them." Daniel nodded. "I will." I believed him. That was my first mistake. After Margaret died, Emily insisted I shouldn't live alone. She came over almost every evening. Sometimes she brought dinner. Sometimes she brought groceries. Sometimes she just sat at the kitchen table while I drank coffee. Daniel rarely stayed long. He had his own construction company and was always busy. I understood. A few months after the funeral, Emily asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Dad, what would you think about us moving in?" I looked up from my coffee. "You and Daniel? And the kids?" My grandchildren, Noah and Lily, were 7 and 10. "You want to move here?" "Only for a while." "Why?" She hesitated. "Daniel's business is having a rough year." "How rough?" "Not terrible." That meant terrible. I knew my daughter. She had inherited her mother's habit of softening bad news. I asked whether they needed financial help. She said no. I didn't push. A week later, they moved in. I gave them the master bedroom. That wasn't even a question. Margaret and I had always agreed that if Emily ever needed help, she would have it. I moved into the smaller bedroom at the back of the house. It didn't bother me. At first. Daniel promised they'd contribute to the mortgage, utilities, and repairs. They did. For about 3 months. Then payments became late. Then smaller. Then non-existent. Whenever I mentioned it, Daniel had an explanation. A delayed client payment. A tax issue. A truck repair. Payroll. Insurance. I wasn't worried. I had savings. The house was paid off. My pension covered my needs. I wasn't asking my daughter for rent. I just wanted them to remember that the arrangement was supposed to be temporary. But something changed around the 6th month. It wasn't dramatic. That's how these things usually begin. Daniel started referring to the house as our place. At first, I ignored it. Then he began making decisions about repairs without asking me. He replaced the front door. He installed cameras outside. He moved furniture. He even removed the old wooden bench Margaret and I had built together. I asked him where it was. In storage. Why? It was falling apart. I stared at him. It was 30 years old. Exactly. He didn't understand. Or didn't care. That bench wasn't valuable because it was beautiful. It was valuable because Margaret and I had built it on a Saturday afternoon while Emily played in the yard. Margaret had painted one side of it green. I had painted the other side white. Neither knew what we were doing. It looked terrible. We loved it. I told Daniel I wanted it back. He said he'd see what he could do. I never saw it again. That should have been enough warning. It wasn't. The next thing was my mail. I noticed a stack of envelopes sitting on the kitchen counter one morning. I picked them up. One was from the county. Another was from the bank. The third was from my insurance company. I moved them to my desk. Daniel walked in. Those came yesterday. I know. You should probably start getting them electronically. Why? Less clutter. I looked at him. I've received paper mail for 40 years. He smiled. I'm just trying to help. I nodded. But I noticed something. The envelope from the county had already been opened. I didn't say anything. I put it in my desk. That night, I checked my online accounts. Nothing looked wrong. Still, I changed my passwords. Not because I believed Daniel had stolen anything. Because something in me had started paying attention. A week later, Emily asked me to sign a document. What is it? Just something for the house. I held out my hand. Let me read it. She smiled nervously. It's complicated. That doesn't answer my question. Daniel says it's standard. Daniel isn't signing it for me. She looked annoyed. Dad. I looked at my daughter. When your mother was alive, she always told you to read anything before you sign it. I know. Then read it. I don't understand all of it. Neither do I. That's why we don't sign it. She took the paper back. That evening, Daniel didn't speak to me during dinner. The next morning, he did. Do you trust us? It was such a strange question that I almost laughed. Of course. Then why are you making everything difficult? I'm not. You're refusing to sign something that would make things easier for everyone. What was it? He paused. Nothing important. I looked at him. Then why do you need my signature? He walked away. That was the first time I wondered whether the problem wasn't money. Maybe it was the house. Maybe it had never been about helping Emily. Maybe they wanted something I hadn't realized they were trying to take. I started looking through my files. The house deed was in a fireproof box in my office. I opened it. My name was there. Thomas Andrew Bennett. Sole owner. I read the document twice. Then I checked the mortgage records. Paid in full. No liens. No second mortgage. Nothing. I closed the box. For the moment, I felt foolish. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief had made me suspicious. Maybe Daniel was simply stressed. Then I noticed something else. A folder was missing. It was the folder containing the original closing documents from when Margaret and I bought the house. I searched the office. Nothing. I searched the filing cabinet. Nothing. I asked Emily. Have you seen a blue folder? She looked confused. What folder? The original house papers. No. Daniel walked into the room. What are you looking for? The blue folder. His expression changed. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. I don't know. I watched him. Are you sure? Yes. He walked out. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2:14 in the morning, I got up. I walked into the kitchen. The house was completely silent. I opened the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of water. Then I heard footsteps outside my bedroom. I froze. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds later, I heard the office door close. I walked down the hallway. The office was dark. I turned on the light. Nobody was there. But the drawer containing my property records was open. I stood there for a long time. Then I checked it. The blue folder was still missing. I didn't go back to bed. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. At 7:10, Emily came downstairs. She looked exhausted. "Dad?" I looked at her. "Did you go into my office last night?" Her face changed. "No." "Did Daniel?" "I don't know." I nodded. She poured coffee. I watched her hands. They were shaking. "Emily." She didn't answer. "What's happening?" "Nothing." "That's not true." She stared at the counter. Then she whispered. "Dad, please don't make me choose." My stomach tightened. "Choose between what?" She didn't answer. "Emily." She closed her eyes. "I can't do this." "Do what?" She picked up her coffee and walked away. I let her go. But something had become very clear. My daughter wasn't unaware of what was happening. She was afraid of it. And that meant Daniel had more control over her than I had realized. For the next 2 weeks, I changed the way I lived. I stopped arguing. I stopped asking questions that would alert him. I started documenting everything. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted facts. I bought a notebook and kept it in my car. Every conversation. Every payment. Every document. Every strange incident. I wrote down dates. Times. Names. I saved copies of my bank statements. I photographed the contents of my office. I checked my credit report. I contacted the county recorder's office. Nothing had changed. The house was still mine. But there was one thing I hadn't checked. Whether someone had tried to change that. I called an old friend named Robert Hayes. Robert had been an attorney for 36 years before retiring. He and I had worked together on a community board years earlier. When I explained what was happening, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was paranoid. He simply asked. "Do you have the original deed?" "Yes." "Good." "Why?" "Because people don't usually ask someone to sign papers for no reason." I was silent. Then I told him about the missing folder. There was a long pause. "Thomas." "Yes." "Get a certified copy of the property record." "I can do that." "And don't tell your son-in-law." "Why?" "Because if everything is innocent, you lose nothing. And if it isn't?" Robert's voice became quieter. "Then you need to know before they know that you know." I wrote that sentence down. Before they knew that I knew. That became my rule. The next morning, I went to the county records office. The clerk printed the property history. I sat in my car and read it. Everything looked normal. Then I saw a recent filing. It wasn't a transfer. It was a document I hadn't seen before. A preliminary title-related filing had been submitted 3 months earlier. The name attached to it wasn't mine. It was Daniel's. I read it again. My hands became cold. I called Robert. "I'm looking at a filing." "What kind?" "I don't understand it." "Read me the title." I did. He was silent for several seconds. "Thomas, don't sign anything." "I haven't." "Good." What does this mean? It may mean nothing. Be an attempt to establish an interest. I need to see it. I photographed the document and sent it. 5 minutes later, Robert called back. Where are you? In my car. Go home. Why? Because I don't want you discussing this over the phone where someone might overhear you. I looked at my house. The house Margaret and I had bought. The house where my daughter had grown up. The house where my grandchildren were sleeping upstairs. I whispered. Robert, what did he do? I don't know yet. Then what should I do? Nothing. Nothing. Exactly. Keep acting normal. I didn't know then that those 2 words would save me. Keep acting normal. So I went home. I walked through the front door carrying groceries. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen island. He looked up. Where were you? Grocery store. What took so long? Traffic. He nodded. I put the groceries away. Then he said. Your parents are coming Saturday. I turned. My parents? He smiled. You know what I mean. Your parents. Yes. And? They're staying here. For how long? A few weeks. I looked at him. And where are they sleeping? He didn't hesitate. Your room. I stared at him. Why? Because they can't climb stairs easily. I almost laughed. Daniel's parents were in their late 50s. Both perfectly capable of climbing stairs. There was another bedroom downstairs. The guest room. But that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted mine. Daniel, I said carefully, your parents can have the guest room. No. Why not? Because my mother needs a private bathroom. The guest room had a bathroom. He knew that. I knew that. There was no argument to make. So I simply said. Fine. He looked surprised. You're okay with it? I'll manage. He smiled. Good. Then he said the sentence that would change everything. Actually, you'll probably need to sleep in the shed. I looked at him. The shed? Just while they're here. And where are you planning to put your things? He shrugged. We'll figure it out. I nodded. All right. That night, I packed a small bag. Daniel saw me. He smiled. Thanks for being reasonable. I looked at him. You're welcome. But I didn't put the bag in the shed. I put it in the trunk of my car. Because my decision had already been made. I wasn't going to fight for a bedroom. I wasn't going to beg my daughter for respect. And I wasn't going to throw them out in anger. I was going to find out exactly what they were trying to do with my house. Then I was going to let the truth speak for itself. The next morning, I called Robert. I've decided. What? I'm leaving. He was quiet. Are you sure? Yes. Where will you go? I haven't decided. Don't leave the house without understanding your legal position. I don't mean permanently. I know. I want them to believe I've surrendered. Robert understood immediately. Thomas. I need them to stop being careful. Another pause. Then he said. That's dangerous. Why? Because people who think they've won sometimes become reckless. That may be exactly what I need. Robert sighed. Then we're going to do this carefully. He gave me the name of another attorney, a property specialist named Laura Mitchell. I met Laura 2 days later. She was younger than Robert, probably in her early 40s, and had the kind of calm expression that made you feel she had heard every possible version of human foolishness. I handed her the documents. She read them. Then she looked at me. "Do you know why this filing was made?" "No." "Do you know whether your son-in-law has represented himself as having an ownership interest?" "Not directly." "Has he ever told anyone the house belongs to him?" "He's called it our house." "That isn't enough." "I know." She nodded. "Then we need more." I told her about the missing folder. The late payments. The document Emily wanted me to sign. The midnight visit to my office. The conversations. Everything. When I finished, Laura folded her hands. "Mr. Bennett, I'm going to say something you may not like." "Go ahead." "This isn't necessarily a property dispute." "What is it?" "It may be an attempt to create one." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means someone may be trying to establish a story before establishing a legal position." "A story?" "For example, if someone repeatedly tells people they live in a house as an owner, contributes to certain expenses, makes improvements, receives mail there, and presents themselves as having authority over the property, they may later try to use those facts to support an argument." I thought about Daniel calling it our house. The cameras. The repairs. The mail. The document. The missing folder. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Laura continued. "I need you to understand something else." "What?" "Don't confront him yet." I almost smiled. "Everyone keeps telling me that." "Because confrontation is exactly what he may be waiting for." "Why?" "If he can make you look unstable, unreasonable, vindictive, or confused, it can muddy everything." I nodded. "So what do I do?" "Live your life." That sounds simple. It isn't. "What else?" "Document." She pointed at the folder. "Keep originals outside the house." I nodded. "Secure your financial accounts." I nodded again. "Don't sign anything." I won't. "And don't tell your daughter what we're doing." That one hurt. "Why not?" "Because you don't know whether she is helping him willingly." I looked away. She wouldn't. Laura didn't argue. She simply said, "You love your daughter." That's obvious. But love and trust are not always the same thing. I didn't like hearing it. But I remembered something Margaret had told me years earlier. When Emily was 16, she had borrowed my truck without asking and dented the rear bumper. I had been furious. Margaret had looked at me and said, "You can love someone enough to forgive them and still love them enough to make them responsible." I hadn't understood then. I did now. That weekend, Daniel's parents arrived. Frank and Patricia Caldwell. They walked through my front door carrying expensive luggage. Patricia looked around. "Oh, this is lovely." Frank nodded. "Much bigger than I expected." Daniel smiled. "Make yourselves comfortable." Patricia turned toward me. "Thomas, dear, we're so sorry about the inconvenience." I smiled. "Don't worry about it." She touched my arm. "You're very generous." I almost laughed. Generous. That was one word for it. Daniel had already moved my clothes out of my room. He had put my photographs into cardboard boxes. When I opened one, I found a framed picture of Margaret wrapped in an old towel. I held it for a long time. Emily came into the doorway. "Dad." I didn't look at her. "Why is this packed?" "I thought you'd be moving some things." "To where?" She didn't answer. I looked at her. Emily, is this really what you want? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. That's not an answer. She whispered. I'm trying to keep things together. For who? She looked at me. For everyone. I shook my head. No. You're trying to keep things quiet. She flinched. That's not fair. Maybe. She wiped her eyes. Daniel says if we lose this house, everything falls apart. I stopped breathing for a second. There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting for. Why would you lose the house? I don't know. Then why does he say that? I don't know. Emily. She looked toward the hallway. Then she whispered. He owes money. I already knew that. How much? I don't know. What kind of money? I don't know. I waited. She started crying. I swear, Dad, I don't know everything. I stepped closer. Then tell me what you do know. She shook her head. I can't. Why? Because he'll know I told you. Who? She didn't answer. But she didn't need to. Daniel appeared behind her. Everything okay? Emily wiped her face. Yes. Daniel looked at me. Then at her. Then back at me. What are you two talking about? I smiled. Your mother-in-law's apple pie recipe. Patricia shouted from the kitchen. Thomas, I heard that. I laughed. Daniel watched me. He didn't believe me. But he didn't know why. That was exactly where I wanted him. 2 days later, I moved into the shed. Not because I accepted his decision. Because I wanted to see what he would do once he believed I had no resistance left. The shed had a concrete floor, a single small window, and shelves covered with gardening tools. I put an old mattress against the wall. There was no heater. I brought a sleeping bag. At night, the temperature dropped sharply. I could hear the rain on the metal roof. For the first few minutes, I felt humiliated. Then I remembered Margaret. She had once told me that pride could make a person stay in a burning house simply because they refused to admit someone had set it on fire. I smiled in the darkness. I'm not staying, I whispered. The next morning, Daniel opened the shed door. You okay? I sat up. Fine. Good. He looked around. You'll get used to it. I stared at him. He smiled. Then he left. I waited until he was gone. Then I reached into my bag. Inside was a second phone. A cheap prepaid device. Robert had suggested it. I turned it on. There was one message. From Laura. Meeting moved to Thursday. Bring records. I smiled. The game had changed. I just needed to make sure Daniel didn't realize it. The next 3 weeks were almost peaceful. That was what made them dangerous. Daniel became relaxed. He stopped watching me. He started talking about future plans. One evening, I overheard him on the phone. Once it's done, we can refinance. I froze. Refinance what? The house? I stood outside the kitchen door. He continued. No, she doesn't know yet. A pause. Yes, I said it was under control. Another pause. Then. My father-in-law is basically out of the picture. I stepped away before he could see me. I went back to the shed. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From certainty. This had never been about a bedroom. It had never been about his parents. It had never been about temporary inconvenience. They were trying to take control of my home. But how? That was the question. The next day, Laura called. We found something. What? The filing. What about it? It was connected to a company. What company? She gave me the name. Bennett Ridge Holdings. I frowned. That isn't mine. I know. Who owns it? That's what we're checking. I sat on the edge of the mattress. Laura. Yes. Could my son-in-law have created a company using my name? Possibly. Why? Liability protection. Financing. Many reasons. But why my name? That's what we need to establish. I closed my eyes. Margaret's words came back to me. Don't let this house become a museum. I suddenly understood something. She hadn't been talking only about grief. She had been talking about the danger of holding on to something so tightly that you forgot to protect yourself. I had spent my entire life believing that keeping the family together was my responsibility. Maybe that belief had made me easy to manipulate. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Emily. Daniel was out. I looked at her. Do you know a company called Bennett Ridge Holdings? Her face went pale. I knew immediately. She knew. What is it? She looked down. Dad. What is it? I don't know. That's the second time you've said that. She started crying. I saw papers. What papers? Daniel's. What did they say? I don't know. You do know. She wiped her face. He said it was temporary. What was temporary? The house. My voice became quiet. What does that mean? She stared at me. He said he could use the house as collateral. I felt my chest tighten. Collateral for what? I don't know. Emily. She whispered. His business. I sat back. Does he have your signature? No. Does he have mine? I don't know. She covered her face. I stood up. Look at me. She did. Did you sign anything? She didn't answer. I waited. Finally she said. Once. What? A document. What document? I thought it was for taxes. My stomach dropped. Emily. I didn't know. Where is it? I don't know. Who prepared it? Daniel. I turned away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said. Dad, please. I looked back. Please what? Don't destroy our family. I stared at her. Emily, I didn't do this. I know. Then why are you asking me to stop? Because if Daniel loses everything, the kids lose everything. I walked toward her. Your children are not my bargaining chip. She started crying. I know. No. You don't. I pointed toward the hallway. Your mother and I worked 30 years to build something we could leave you. We didn't build it so someone could gamble it away. He's not trying to gamble it away. Then why does he need it? She had no answer. I sat down. After a long silence, I said. Do you still have the document you signed? She nodded. Where? In my room. Get it. She looked terrified. If Daniel sees. He won't. She went upstairs. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a folded document. I didn't open it. Laura's attorney instead. The next morning, Laura called. Thomas. Yes. You need to come in. I went. She put the document on the table. Your daughter signed a limited authorization. For what? Financial representation. Does it affect the house? Not directly. I exhaled. But, she continued, it appears someone may have used it to create another document. What document? A corporate guarantee. I stared at her. What does that mean? Your daughter may have guaranteed a business obligation. Using what? Her personal assets. I looked at her. She doesn't own the house. No. So why are we talking about my house? Because the company filing suggests they intended to connect the business obligation to the property. I felt the room become very quiet. Did they succeed? No. I looked at her. No. Not yet. Those two words were the most important words I had heard in months. Not yet. I asked. What happens if they try again? Laura smiled faintly. Then we'll be ready. I looked at the documents. What do you need from me? Nothing dramatic. Tell me. Continue exactly as you've been doing. Living in the shed. If necessary. I laughed. I never thought I'd hear an attorney tell me that. She smiled. Sometimes the best legal strategy is allowing someone to underestimate you. I left her office carrying a folder. But before I reached my car, my phone rang. It was Robert. I heard. Heard what? Laura told me. I smiled. I'm fine. I know. Then why did you call? Because I remembered something. What? Do you remember when you and Margaret bought the house? Of course. Who handled the closing? An attorney named Samuel Price. Is he still alive? I thought about it. I don't know. Robert said. Find out. Why? Because I remember Margaret telling me something about him. What? She said he kept an extra copy of your original closing file. I stopped walking. Why? I don't remember. Could he still have it? Maybe. Why does that matter? Because if someone has been trying to reconstruct your property records, the original file may contain something they didn't know existed. I looked toward the house. The shed. The windows. The room where Margaret had died. The room Daniel had given to his parents. I suddenly realized that the past 30 years might contain the answer to what was happening now. And I had no idea what Margaret had left behind. That night, I searched for Samuel Price. He had retired 12 years earlier. But he was alive. And according to an old directory, he still lived 40 minutes away. I called the number. A woman's voice answered. Hello. Is this Mrs. Price? Yes. My name is Thomas Bennett. There was a pause. Thomas? Yes. From the Bennett house? My heart stopped. Yes. She said quietly. My husband has been expecting you. I stared at the phone. Expecting me? He told me if you ever called, I should tell you to come. Why? She hesitated. I don't know. When can I come? Tomorrow. I thanked her. Then I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told Daniel I was going into town. He barely looked up. Okay. I drove 40 minutes to Samuel Price's house. His wife opened the door. He was sitting in a wheelchair near the fireplace. He was 86 years old. His hair was completely white. But his eyes were sharp. He looked at me. Then he smiled. Thomas Bennett. I nodded. Mr. Price. Sam. He gestured toward the chair. Sit. I sat. His wife brought coffee. Sam watched me over the rim of his cup. I wondered when you'd come. I swallowed. Why? Because your wife told me you would. I stared at him. My wife? He smiled. Margaret. My hands tightened around the coffee. When? About 2 years before she died. I couldn't speak. Sam's wife quietly left the room. Sam reached toward a cabinet. He pulled out an old cardboard box. It was dusty. He placed it on the table. Your closing file. I stared at it. You kept it? Margaret asked me to. Why? Because she didn't trust your daughter. I froze. Emily. Sam nodded. She didn't think Emily was bad. Then what? She thought Emily was too trusting. I looked at the box. What did Margaret know? Sam leaned back. That's why she asked me to keep this. He opened the box. Inside were documents from 1997. Closing papers. Receipts. Survey maps. A handwritten letter. I recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately. I picked it up. My name was written on the front. Thomas. My throat tightened. Sam said. She told me not to give it to you unless something happened. Something like what? He looked directly at me. Someone trying to take your house. I stared at him. What? He nodded. Margaret was more observant than you gave her credit for. I opened the letter. There were only 2 pages. I read the first line. Thomas, if Sam is giving you this, then you probably waited too long. I stopped. The room disappeared for a moment. Margaret. Her handwriting. Her words. Still waiting for me. I continued. I know you. You'll want to believe the best in people. That's one of the things I love most about you, and one of the things that scares me. My eyes blurred. I wiped them. The letter continued. Don't let guilt make decisions for you. I looked at Sam. He said nothing. I read on. Emily will always be our little girl. But she is an adult. Her choices are hers. Your responsibility is not to rescue her from every consequence. I stopped reading. Those words hurt more than anything Daniel had said. Because Margaret had known me. She knew exactly what I would do. She knew I would give away everything I had before allowing my daughter to suffer. Then I reached the final paragraph. If the house is ever threatened, don't fight over the house. I frowned. What does that mean? Sam pointed to the last line. I read it. Find out why they need it. I looked up. Sam's expression was serious. That's what she wanted you to understand. I sat there in silence. Why? Because she knew someone would eventually try. Who? I don't know. Daniel? I've never met him. Then who? Sam shook his head. Your wife never told me. I looked back at the documents. Then I noticed something. A small envelope taped to the bottom of the box. My name was written on it. I pulled it free. Sam said. She told me that one was for you only if the first letter wasn't enough. My hands trembled. I opened. Inside was a single sheet. 3 sentences. I read the first. If they try to take the house, look at the original survey. The second. Then look under the back corner of the garage. The third. You'll understand why I never told you. I stared at the paper. What does that mean? Sam shook his head. I don't know. I stood. I need to go. Sam nodded. As I walked toward the door, he called after me. Thomas. I turned. Your wife loved you. I smiled sadly. I know. No, he said. You know she loved you. But you don't know how much she worried about you. I left without answering. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the garage. The back corner. The survey. Why would Margaret hide something there? And why would she tell me only if someone tried to take the house? I reached home at 4:30. Daniel's truck was in the driveway. I parked down the street. I didn't want him seeing me arrive. I walked around the back. The garage door was closed. I entered through the side. I pulled out the original survey. The property boundaries were clearly marked. But something caught my attention. Near the rear corner of the garage was a notation. Easement. I stared at it. I had never noticed it before. There was a narrow strip of land behind the garage that technically belonged to the county utility authority. I checked the date. Then I remembered something. The garage had been rebuilt in 2003. Margaret had handled the paperwork. I had been working 12-hour shifts. She had overseen everything. I suddenly wondered whether the garage had been built slightly outside the original boundary. I measured the corner. The survey indicated one thing. The physical structure suggested another. I called Laura. She listened. Then she said, "Don't touch anything." I wasn't going to. Good. Why would this matter? I don't know yet. Could someone use it against me? Possibly. Then why did Margaret hide it? Maybe because she discovered something about the property. I looked at the garage. What? Let's find out. The next morning, Laura sent a surveyor. We met quietly. He measured the property. Then he examined the garage. After 2 hours, he found something. The garage was not entirely on my property. A small rear section extended approximately 18 inches into the easement. I stared at him. Is that bad? Not necessarily. Then what is it? An old encroachment. Can someone make me tear it down? Not necessarily. Why would Margaret care? The surveyor pointed toward the county records. Because this may have existed for decades. I looked at Laura. She was reading something on her tablet. Then she looked up. Thomas. Yes. This isn't what I thought it was. What? The filing Daniel made. She turned the screen toward me. I read it. The document referenced the property. But it also referenced the easement. My stomach tightened. Why? Laura said. Because someone may have discovered the easement and believes it creates leverage. Leverage for what? Financing. I understood. Daniel didn't need to own my entire house. He only needed to convince a lender that he had an interest in it. The shed. The room. The cameras. The mail. The document. All of it was beginning to fit. But there was still one piece missing. Daniel had debts. But why risk everything for a property that wasn't his? I asked Laura. She looked at me. Because your house may be worth more than you think. I frowned. It's worth maybe 600,000. Not anymore. She showed me a valuation. My property had become one of the most desirable lots in the area because of a new commercial development plan 2 blocks away. $1.4 million. I stared at the number. I had no idea. Neither did Emily. But apparently Daniel did. That evening, I watched him from the kitchen. He was laughing with his parents. They were talking about moving furniture. My furniture. My house. My life. And suddenly I wasn't angry. I was calm. Very calm. Because for the first time, I knew exactly what Daniel wanted. The only thing I didn't know was how far he was willing to go. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Daniel came into the shed. He stood in the doorway. Dad. I looked up from my book. Yeah. We need to talk. Okay. He stepped inside. You've been difficult lately. I almost smiled. How? You're distant. I've been sleeping in a shed. He laughed. See? That's exactly what I mean. What do you want? He sat on an overturned bucket. I want us to be a family. I looked at him. You want that? Yes. Then why am I sleeping outside? He rubbed his hands together. It's temporary. Everything seems to be temporary lately. He ignored that. I have an opportunity. What kind? A business opportunity. Good. I need your help. There it was. I closed my book. What kind of help? He leaned forward. Just a signature. I looked at him. What signature? It's complicated. I smiled. Then I probably shouldn't sign it. He laughed. You don't trust me. I didn't say that. You don't. I stared at him. Then I said. Daniel, I don't sign documents I haven't read. He became quiet. Then his expression hardened. You know, Dad, sometimes you make things harder than they need to be. I said nothing. He stood. You've been living here alone since Margaret died. Yes. You don't need this much space. I watched him. What are you saying? He looked around the shed. Maybe it's time to think about moving somewhere smaller. There it was. Not a request. A test. He wanted to know whether I would fight. I smiled. Maybe. His eyebrows lifted. Maybe. Maybe you're right. He stared at me. You'd move? I said maybe. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled. That's good. He walked out. I waited until he was gone. Then I called Laura. He came. What did he ask? My signature. Did you sign? No. Good. He suggested I move. There was a pause. Thomas. Yes. I think we're close. How close? Close enough that you need to be very careful. Why? Because if he thinks you're willing to leave, he may accelerate whatever he's planning. I looked through the small shed window toward the house. That's what I want. Laura was silent. Thomas, what exactly are you planning? I smiled. Nothing. She sighed. I don't believe you. You shouldn't. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went into my old bedroom. Daniel's parents were downstairs. The room was mostly empty now. Margaret's phone was gone. The dresser was gone. My chair was gone. But behind the closet door was one thing Daniel hadn't noticed. A small wooden box. Margaret's jewelry box. Inside was her wedding ring. I picked it up. Then I noticed something beneath it. A key. I had seen that key before. It belonged to a lock on the old workbench in the garage. I hadn't opened that drawer since Margaret died. I took the key. Then I waited until everyone left. I went into the garage. The workbench was covered in dust. I unlocked the drawer. Inside were receipts. Old photographs. A USB drive. And a small notebook. Margaret's handwriting. I opened it. The first page had one sentence. Things Thomas doesn't notice. I laughed. Actually laughed. Of course. I sat on the floor. Page after page. Notes about household expenses. Property taxes. Repairs. Conversations with contractors. Names. Dates. And then I found something that made me stop. A note dated 8 years earlier. Daniel asked Thomas about the house again. I read the next line. He says it's only curiosity. Another page. Daniel asked how much equity we have. Another. Emily says he's thinking about expanding his business. Then. Thomas believes him. I closed my eyes. Margaret had seen this coming. Not the exact betrayal. But the pattern. She had noticed what I refused to notice. Then I found a final note. Written 6 months before she died. Daniel is in trouble. Emily doesn't know how much. I stared at it. The date was 6 months before Daniel moved into our house. Then another line. If something happens to me, Thomas will try to save Emily. He always does. I felt tears come to my eyes. The next line was underlined. Don't save her by destroying yourself. I sat there for a long time. Then I found the USB drive. I didn't plug it into the house computer. I took it to Laura. She had a secure system. When we opened it, there were scans of old emails. One email was from Daniel. 7 years earlier. He had written to Margaret. The subject line. Need your help. I read it. Daniel had already been asking about borrowing against the house. 7 years ago. Before the business problems. Before the shed. This wasn't desperation. It was planning. Laura read the email. Then she looked at me. This changes everything. I nodded. What else is on there? We kept going. More emails. More requests. More excuses. Then one email made my blood run cold. It was from Daniel to someone named Victor Hale. The date was 11 months before Margaret died. The message was short. Once the old man is gone, Emily will sign anything I put in front of her. I stared at the screen. Old man. Not Dad. Not Thomas. Old man. I felt something inside me go completely still. Laura said nothing. I kept reading. Another email. We just need the house. Another. It's worth too much to let it sit there. Then the final one. Margaret is the only problem. I stopped. I looked at Laura. Who is Victor Hale? She had already begun searching. Business associate. Of Daniel? Yes. Can you find him? Probably. I leaned back. Suddenly, Margaret's death felt different. Not because I believed Daniel had caused it. I didn't. But because I realized he had been thinking about my wife's illness as an opportunity. He had been waiting. Maybe for the house. Maybe for the moment and when Margaret died, he moved in. My daughter thought he was helping us. I had thought he was helping us. He had been positioning himself. I left Laura's office with copies of everything. That evening, I didn't go back to the shed immediately. I sat in my truck across the street. I watched the house. Lights came on upstairs. Noah's silhouette passed a window. Lily followed him. Then Emily. Then Daniel. For a moment, they looked like an ordinary family. And that was the hardest part. Because the people inside weren't strangers. They were my family. I thought about Margaret. I thought about her letter. Don't let guilt make decisions for you. I started the truck. I wasn't going to destroy my daughter. I was going to give her the truth. What she did with it would be her decision. The next day, I made my move. I called Daniel. I've been thinking. About what? Your business. He became quiet. I might be willing to help. How? Let's meet. Where? Your office. There was a pause. Then. Okay. I drove there at 2. Daniel greeted me with a smile. I sat across from him. He slid a folder across the desk. This is what I need. I opened it. A loan restructuring agreement. My name appeared in several places. I read carefully. Daniel watched me. You don't need to understand everything. I smiled. That's what people say right before they ask me to sign something I shouldn't. His smile faded. Dad. I need time. How much? 2 days. He leaned back. Fine. I stood. Then I looked at him. Daniel. What? If you ever need help, ask me honestly. He stared at me. What do you mean? Nothing. I walked out. He believed he had made progress. He believed I was considering signing. He had no idea that Laura was already preparing a response. The next 48 hours were quiet. Too quiet. Then, on Friday afternoon, Daniel came home with 2 men. I recognized one immediately. Victor Hale. He was older than I expected. Late 50s. Gray hair. Expensive coat. He looked at me as though we had met before. Maybe we had. Daniel smiled. Dad, this is Victor. I shook his hand. Nice to meet you. Victor's grip was firm. Thomas. The way he said my name made me uncomfortable. Daniel said. Victor's here to help with the paperwork. I nodded. Good. Victor looked around the house. Then he said. I smiled. Thank you. He looked at Daniel. Then back at me. You've owned it a long time. 30 years. Must be valuable. I said nothing. Daniel stepped in. Dad doesn't like talking about money. Victor smiled. I understand. I looked at him. What exactly are you here for? Just to make sure everyone understands the opportunity. What opportunity? Daniel answered. The business. Victor opened the folder. I didn't touch it. He began explaining numbers. Loans. Equity. Expansion. Collateral. I listened. Then I asked one question. If the business fails, what happens to the house? Daniel looked at Victor. Victor looked at me. Then he said, that depends on the final structure. I smiled. Then I need to know the final structure before I sign anything. Victor nodded. Of course. He closed the folder. We'll talk again. They left. I watched their car disappear. Then I called Laura. They came. Who? Victor Hale. There was a pause. You met him? Yes. Did he ask you to sign? Yes. Did you? No. Good. What now? Laura's answer was simple. Now we stop waiting. The following Monday, we filed the necessary notices and protections. Nothing dramatic. No confrontation. No police. No shouting. Just paperwork. Documentation. Official records. The kind of things people ignore until they discover those things matter. I also moved my original documents to a secure location. I changed my financial access. I contacted the bank. I notified the relevant institutions that I had not authorized any borrowing against my property. I created a written record of my ownership. Then I waited. 3 days later, Daniel came into the shed. His face was different. What did you do? I looked up. Nothing. Don't lie to me. I didn't. You contacted the bank. I said nothing. He stepped closer. You had no right. I looked at him. No right? Yes. To my own property. He stopped. I had never said that before. Not directly. His face changed. What are you talking about? I stood. This house belongs to me. He laughed nervously. Of course it does. Then why are you angry that I protected it? He didn't answer. I took one step toward him. Why did you file documents involving my property? His face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Bennett Ridge Holdings. He froze. I watched him. You know the name. He swallowed. You've been talking to someone. Yes. Who? That doesn't matter. He stepped closer. Where did you get that information? I smiled. That's the question, isn't it? He turned and walked away. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. For the first time, Daniel was afraid. But I knew this wasn't over. Because people who have spent years planning rarely stop when the first plan fails. They changed the plan. And Daniel changed his. 2 nights later, I woke up to shouting. I ran toward the house. Emily was crying. Daniel was standing in the kitchen holding a folder. What is this? She demanded. You signed it. I didn't know what it was. You should have read it. I trusted you. He threw the folder onto the table. You always trust your father more than me. I stepped into the room. Daniel turned. This is between me and my wife. I looked at Emily. Do you want me to leave? She shook her head. No. Daniel glared at me. This is your fault. I said nothing. He pointed at me. You've been poisoning her against me. No. You think you're some hero. No. You're destroying my family. I looked at him. You started that yourself. He became silent. Emily stared at him. What did you do? Daniel looked at her. Nothing. She shook her head. You're lying. He looked at me. Then at her. Then he said something that I don't think he intended to reveal. The house was supposed to solve everything. Emily froze. What? Daniel's face changed. I didn't move. Emily whispered. What does that mean? He said nothing. She stepped toward him. What were you going to do with Dad's house? Nothing. You just said it would solve everything. I meant. What were you going to do? He looked at me. And for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. Because he knew his wife had finally started asking the right questions. Emily turned toward me. Dad. I looked at her. I'm sorry. I shook my head. She began crying. What do I do? I looked at Daniel. Then at my daughter. You decide what kind of life you want. Daniel shouted. Don't listen to him. Emily flinched. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not asking you to choose me. I looked at her. I'm asking you to choose the truth. The kitchen went silent. Daniel stared at me. Then he walked out. The front door slammed. Just facts. Finally, he looked at me. You don't understand. Then explain. I was drowning. I know. I needed time. You had years. I thought you would help. I would have. He shook his head. You would have judged me. I looked at him. Maybe. He laughed bitterly. That was the problem. No. I leaned forward. The problem was that you wanted help without accountability. He looked down. I continued. You didn't ask me to help you save your business. You tried to make my house save it for you. He said nothing. Then I pushed one final document across the table. It was Margaret's handwritten notebook. Daniel looked at it. What is that? My wife's. He read the pages. His expression changed. She knew. She noticed you were asking about the house years before I did. He swallowed. I didn't mean. You didn't mean what? He had no answer. For the first time, I saw him as he really was. Not a monster. Not some movie villain. A frightened, selfish man who had convinced himself that his desperation justified what he was doing. That didn't excuse him. But it explained him. And sometimes understanding someone makes it easier to stop hating them. I stood. We're done. Daniel looked up. What happens now? That depends on what you do. Are you pressing charges? I don't decide that. He looked at Laura. She said nothing. I looked at him. I won't destroy you. He almost laughed. You already did. No. I shook my head. You did that when you decided my family was an obstacle between you and what you wanted. He looked away. I walked out. Outside the building, the air was cold. But I felt lighter than I had in years. I drove home. Not to the shed. To the house. My house. I opened the front door. It was quiet. For the first time in months, nobody was telling me where I could sleep. I walked into the bedroom. My old bedroom. Margaret's photographs were still in boxes. I unpacked them. One by one. I put her favorite photograph on the dresser. The one from our 10th anniversary. She was laughing. I was trying to look serious. She had always said I looked ridiculous when I tried to look serious. I sat on the edge of the bed. Then I noticed something. The green and white bench was outside. Daniel had moved it back. I walked out. It was sitting beneath the old oak tree. The paint was peeling. One side green. One side white. Exactly as we had left it. I sat down. For a moment, I could almost hear Margaret laughing. I whispered. You were right. The house didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like home. Months later, Emily and the children came to visit. Noah ran into the backyard. Lily brought a box of old photographs. Emily stood beside me. Dad? Yeah. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you sell the house? I looked toward the bench. Because your mother didn't want me to let it become a museum. Emily smiled. She really said that? She said a lot of things. They were quiet for a moment. Then Emily asked. Do you think she'd forgive me? I looked at my daughter. I think she'd tell you forgiveness isn't the first thing you need. What is? Honesty. She nodded. I know. And responsibility. I know. And patience. She smiled. You sound like her. I've been told that. We laughed. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Daniel and Emily eventually divorced. The process took time. There were arguments. There were apologies. There were days when Emily didn't want to talk about what happened. There were days when I didn't either. But she started rebuilding her life. She went back to work. She learned to manage her own finances. She stopped allowing someone else to make decisions for her. And slowly, carefully, she rebuilt our relationship. Not the old relationship. A different one. A more honest one. One with boundaries. One where love didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. As for Daniel, he moved out of state. The business was gone. The property claim was dismissed. The debts followed him. I never celebrated his downfall. I didn't need to. There is a difference between revenge and consequence. Revenge is wanting someone to hurt because they hurt you. Justice is allowing the truth to determine what happens next. I had spent months thinking my victory would be watching Daniel lose everything. It wasn't. My victory was waking up one morning and realizing I no longer cared what he thought of me. I had my home. I had my memories. I had my daughter, even if rebuilding that relationship took time. And most importantly, I had finally learned something Margaret had been trying to teach me for years. Being a good father doesn't mean protecting your children from every consequence. Being a good father sometimes means letting them face the consequences so they can become strong enough to stand on their own. A year after everything ended, I was sitting beneath the oak tree on that old bench. Emily brought me coffee. She handed me the cup. Still drink it black. Always. She sat beside me. We watched the grandchildren play. After a few minutes, she said. Dad? Yeah. I'm glad you didn't leave. I looked at her. I almost did. I know. How? You left your bag in the car. I laughed. You saw it? Yes. You never said anything. I was scared. I nodded. She looked at the house. Thank you for staying. I took a sip of coffee. I didn't stay for Daniel. I know. I didn't stay because I was afraid of being alone. I know. I stayed because your mother told me something. What? I looked at the old house. She told me not to let guilt make my decisions. Emily smiled. That sounds like Mom. It does. The children shouted from the yard. Emily stood. I'll get them. She walked away. I stayed on the bench. The green paint was almost completely gone now. The white paint was peeling too. But the bench was still solid. 30 years old. Maybe more. Still holding us. I ran my hand across the rough wood. And I thought about that night when Daniel had stood in the kitchen and told me to sleep in the shed. At the time, I thought he was taking away my room. He wasn't. He was showing me exactly who he was. And strangely enough, that was a gift. Because sometimes people reveal themselves when they think you're too weak to fight back. Sometimes humiliation is the moment you finally stop making excuses for someone. Sometimes losing your place at the table teaches you that you never needed their permission to stand up. And sometimes the quietest decision you make becomes the strongest one of your life. I didn't decide to destroy Daniel. I didn't decide to punish my daughter. I didn't decide to sell the house. I decided something much simpler. I decided that from that day forward, nobody would make decisions about my life without me. Not because I was angry. Because I finally understood my worth. If you've ever been asked to sacrifice your dignity just to keep peace in your family, I'd like to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have left? Or would you have waited, gathered the truth, and let the people who underestimated you reveal themselves? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear that love and boundaries can exist together, share it with them. Subscribe to Father's Hidden Reckoning for more stories about family, betrayal, consequences, and the moments when people finally decide they have had enough. And remember this. You can love your family without surrendering yourself to them. You can forgive someone without giving them access to your life again. And you can walk away from an argument without walking away from your dignity. Because sometimes the strongest decision isn't to fight. It's to stop allowing someone else to decide what you are worth.